Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful in oil country and around the world. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
You are here. I am here. Hi, David. How are you today?
I'm strangely okay with what happened at the deadline, although I was hoping for more.
Mm-hmm.
I dreaded a bad trade, like a third round pick for Luke Glendening kind of trade, which I would have thought was a bad trade. So I guess I'm okay with it, Bruce, and I'm left with a strong feeling that the Oilers are a team right now who I think are in trouble, but they have within them the solutions to what ails them. They didn't necessarily have to make a big trade. I think there's internal moves that were just as strong that haven't been tried yet that the Oilers could resort to bring some pop back to their attack. Their attack, which in the last dozen games has gone completely flat. And the coach seems to be out of answers. But there's time yet. And I think that there's answers within the team to solve whatever ails the Oilers. So overall, I'm good. How about you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Those last 12 games mostly overlaps the time that they've been running the centers one line with Draisaitl and McDavid, and what it's done is it's really thinned out their depth scoring. So if their answer lies within the team, I think they're probably going to have to find it by doing some redeployment. Um, yeah, I'm kind of betwixt and between. Let's put it this way. I came into this trade deadline with low expectations, and they were not exceeded.
Ken Holland, and certainly got the message out himself and through the media. A lot of people are. Some people are in kind of shoot the messenger mode with the media right now. The media was essentially passing on Holland's message that nothing much is going to happen. But that was really clearly, obviously coming from Holland. My only question was, is Holland telling the truth or not? Was he playing poker and working on a big deal? It doesn't sound like he was, actually. It sounds like he was quite honest. Like he didn't feel like they had the cap space or the assets to make a pick right now, and maybe didn't feel that the team was in the right position. That whole thing about the Oilers not being in the right position argument bothered me, Bruce, I have to say, because the Oilers are a better team, I think, right now than they were last year when they made a lot of moves at the cap. They're better positioned to win in the playoffs right now than they were then. And they got Mike Smith playing like a number one goalie. They've got McDavid and Draisaitl just rolling. They've got Darnell Nurse as a number one D-man. They've got an interesting, maybe solid, arguably solid depth in other places. So I like this team quite a bit. And they're also renting Tyson Barrie, Mike Smith, Adam Larson, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, essentially. They're all UFAs after this year. Some of them might not come back, possibly. Now, I know they have a lot of cap space, so they can bring other good players in. But this is a team, I think, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are right in their prime. So I don't get the argument that last year was a good time to go all in, and this year wasn't a good time to go all in. I mean, I guess they spent some assets last year that they don't have this time, like a second-round draft pick. But, Bruce, I would have been really open to seeing them move a first-round draft pick, the first-round draft pick from this season, and another pick to create some cap space, creative use of creation of cap space like other teams like Toronto did, Las Vegas has done. Some of the other teams got really, Tampa Bay did it. So don't tell me this was dollar in, dollar out. There's nothing Ken Holland can do. His hands were tied. No, he made a choice not to do that.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that I understand the choice that he made. What do you understand it?
Well, somewhat. I mean, he was asked directly at the press conference, which I just wrote a post about, with post-deadline, sort of post-mortem. And he was asked directly if he had given any thought to being creative the way Toronto and Tampa had done, and doing sort of double dealing to work down a cap. And as soon as he heard the word creative, he didn't even have to listen to the rest of the question. He just said no. It was actually kind of made me laugh. Like, were you thinking of being creative? No. And that was the whole answer that he gave to that question. But later on, he said, I made a decision last year at the deadline to spend lots of futures. When you make decisions in life, they're going to affect future decisions in life. Meaning, because he'd spent the futures already, he didn't have a lot of futures left to give, which is certainly true with the Oilers being out a second, a third, and a fifth round draft choice. If I were Holland, I would have slipped in a snide remark about how the NHL hosed him out of a third round pick in the Milan Lucic decision. But if I was Holland, I probably wouldn't keep my job for very long because I'd be snarking about the NHL too often. But
Okay.
anyway, that's beside the point. He also said he didn't have a lot of cap room, and at the end of the day, he kind of said, "Well, we got 2 million, but I want to keep 850,000 for Kukuk, and I want to keep the other million to activate players off the taxi squad." Well, 2 million goes a long way, you know. I mean, 2 million was 25% of Nick Foligno's salary was 1.4 million, and 25% of David Savard's salary was only 1.06 million or whatever. So you could buy an expensive player, but the trick would be to do that and to have the assets, and that just was not a path he was prepared to pursue. He figured he's short on both draft capital and cap space, and you need both to make those kind of deals. I mean, both Toronto and Tampa gave up 3 draft picks to make those deals.
Yes, they did. And it's interesting, like he harkens back to last year at the deadline, and he's essentially saying that he traded some picks that he has to pay up this draft. Athanasiou being the main one, the second round pick that he has to pay this draft, and that kind of prevents him. But I wonder if it's also, and I'm just guessing here, I can't read his mind, and I'm not as, if there wasn't a kind of a psychological reason, if the failure of last year's attempt also didn't weigh on him a little bit and prevent him from going down that path again, because and he's obviously a very experienced GM who has experienced many failures at the deadline, because most deadline experiences are a failure because you don't win the Stanley Cup in the end, and often you don't even go that far into the playoffs. So you expend a lot of capital, like the Oilers did last year in terms of assets, and it doesn't work out. And I just wonder if he just thought not doing that again, or just if there wasn't some kind of psychological reason almost just weighing on him a little bit, that he didn't want to have another failure like that hanging over his head. And when he weighed everything, he just didn't seem to think this team was the right team to bet on at this moment in terms of it. Or maybe just the right deal didn't come up, Bruce. Although it's funny, like the price for Taylor Hall in the end turned out to be a second round pick, that and a forward who's got 2 goals this year. Of course, Taylor Hall just has 2 goals. Taylor Hall was had for very, very little. I don't know if he would have come here though. Holland indicated that he was never in on Hall, and maybe that's because Hall wouldn't lift his no movement clause to come to Edmonton. There's always that possibility that we don't even know. Like maybe that wasn't in the cards.
Well, you hear stuff, but how reliable is it that Hull would have been happy to come here? I mean, I
It's
heard at one point
unreliable.
that Hull said he only wanted to go to Edmonton, and I'm going, yeah, I don't think so. But of course, that's not what happened. Unless we forget, not, in addition to 2 goal man Anders Bjork that Buffalo got for Hull and the second round pick, that Buffalo also sent 5 goal man Curtis Lazar as a throw in. And Lazar actually has more goals than Hull and Bjork combined. So I think Buffalo came up way short. If I was a Buffalo fan, I would be really disappointed in that
Bruce,
outcome.
it was funny because there was a lot of excitement in different cities about trades that were made. So Toronto traded a first pick and more and some lower round picks for Nick Foligno. Nick Foligno, Bruce, his points per 60 this year, 1.1 per 60 at even strength. He is below the Kyle Turris line. Kyle Turris is at 1.13. Nick Foligno, who they expended all of like a first round draft pick to get, it's 1.11. The
What intensity, David? He's
grit
got it.
intensity. I mean, there was Matthias Janmark who goes to Vegas for a second and a third pick, I believe. He's at 1.21 points per 60. Well, James Neal's at 1.33 points per 60 this year. So there is some high prices paid for players who aren't exactly killing it this year, at least in the scoring column. And now, of course, these are small sample sizes, and players offer other things than just goal scoring. They could be really solid defensive players, or maybe they have some special talent that other team's looking for. But yeah, I think if Foligno has a poor playoff, people in Toronto are going to have a bad hangover from that deal. That's for sure, because that was a fairly steep price to pay for a guy who looks like he might be past his best before date, at least when it comes to even strength scoring.
They could have had Taylor Hall for a lot less, as it turns out, and that's a very interesting choice by Kyle Dubas.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, he probably just sees a lack of. They've looked good to me, but maybe sees a lack of checking and toughness in his forwards. Wants to get a bit bigger and more defensively responsible, and maybe Foligno really provides that. I mean, that's a very good team. So he obviously knows what he's doing, and
well, he needs another geezer, former captain in his lineup, because he's only got Joe Thornton, Jason Spezza, and John Tavares currently in that role. So now he's got a fourth one just in case.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't necessarily understand Ken Holland's approach to last year as compared to this year, but things change, and they were short on assets, they were short on cap space, and more so than last year. I think that's a fair comment. So maybe he just didn't want to bend over backwards to give up a first-round draft pick for Nick Foligno, and see how that would work out. I'm glad actually the Oilers didn't trade a first-round draft pick for a player like Foligno. Maybe I'll regret that initial hot take in the playoffs, but that's my initial hot take.
I had Foligno on my list as a player of interest, but when I saw the price that was paid for him, I went, yeah, no. I thought maybe with his declining production and being 33 years old, that maybe you could get him for, a second rounder and a prospect or something, but not a first and 2/3 or 2/4 or third and a fourth, whatever it was. It was sort of 2 mid-rounders and a first that Toronto paid both for him and to get his cap hit down to something they could squeeze under the cap.
So Bruce, on Twitter just now, I've asked fans to weigh in on how the Oilers did at the trade deadline, whether it's a pass or a fail. And right now, in early voting, we've had 400 votes. It's 46% give them a pass and 54% give them a fail. So this is very close. This is very close in terms of how fans are reacting. A lot of fans are loyal. So the Holland says, they'll just go with what the GM says. And then of course, there's other fans who are hypercritical who will criticize the GM no matter what. But yeah, it's a split reaction. I think that's about right. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I'm very much. I know you're going to ask me the same question. I'm very much on the fence. Like they succeeded in not doing anything disastrous, and I think the one trade they made is quite perfectly defensible, and it does address the need. But they sure didn't address all of their needs or come anywhere close to that. But I'm not sure there was a way to do that, David, to tell the truth.
I'll read you a few comments. Sure. Here's from Steve to Sony. He says, they added without subtracting too much. This team was not going to win the Stanley Cup by adding a left winger. Right. Powder kept dry for next year. Here's from Brett Harvey. I'm not sure what folks expected to happen in a dollar in, dollar out position. Let's see. Here's from Riley Witu. And Riley says, disappointed we don't have a scoring left winger. That said, we did get a little better, didn't overpay any assets. We might be really glad we still have that first rounder come draft time. If I was a Cult of Hockey grader, I'd give it 6 out of 10. And this is from Carrie L. Kettle. They fulfilled their number one need without mortgaging the future. Let's see if I can find a really... Here's Robert Oakley. They didn't fulfill their biggest need. Kulikov keeps it from a complete write-off as he looks serviceable in a weakness too. If that's it, why even bother? Need to be more aggressive in buying and getting forward help. Only saving grace is that Winnipeg also struck out. So, what would you give on the binary pass or fail, Bruce? If you had to hit one button, what would it be? Pass or fail?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Because I told you.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
And I just clicked. I just voted on your. I opened it up to read
Okay.
it, and I voted yes voted pass, but it's a very very weak pass. 5 out of 10. It's a passing grade, and that's all. For reasons already stated, he didn't have enough room to maneuver to pull off a big swap. And some will say, but Taylor Hall, and maybe so. Um, I don't see that as something that would put them over the top. And when you're dealing at the deadline for an expiring contract, you're looking to go over the top that year. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet. So um, send your slings and arrows my way if you disagree, and I know many do.
Here's the last comment. This is more indicative. There's a lot of unhappy fans out there right now on the Oilogosphere. This is from Kim Jong Oil, and he's saying, miserable, hardcore, awful, worst deadline yet, level fail. In the one season, Oilers management had a reason to improve the team. They did nothing. No, wait, they brought in a defenseman when the only thing the team has is defensemen. There is that. Um, I would feel this way, Bruce. I would be pretty disappointed if I didn't think that there were internal solutions on the Oilers, and I really think that there are. And I'm also looking at some of these prices that were paid, and I'm thinking, what would a Ricard Raquel have cost? How much? What would it have been? Like, would it have been a first pick plus, like a B-level prospect like Ryan McLeod or Raphael Lavoie? That strikes me as a pretty high price to pay. And maybe the Oilers are, counting on Dylan Holloway coming. Bruce, let's talk about Dmitry Kulikov, the player that they did get. They traded a fourth round draft pick for the 2022 draft, which, when the Oilers advance in the playoffs this year, will turn into a third round pick for
we hope it does, yeah.
New Jersey Devils. And I think the Oilers will win their first round and their second round, and their third round. So I think that as much as a third round pick for Kulikov isn't a cheap price, it's not cheap. Now he's a fourth pairing defenseman paired with PK Subban. He's about 6 feet, 205 pounds. So he's a little bit 10 pounds heavier than Caleb Jones. Not a really big defenseman though. He's very physical though. He's in the top 30 for hits per game for Oilers, NHL D-man. He's not as physical as Adam Larsson in terms of hits per game, but he'd be ranked second on the Oilers right now for hits. He is a defensive defenseman. He doesn't put up many points. He is a left shot defenseman. The Oilers have been trying Caleb Jones and William Lagesson in those positions. Ken Holland says that they've played well, but they've both been leaking grade A scoring chances against this year throughout. I know both of them have their fans, and we are both fans of these players too, but I think on performance, they have been struggling. My only concern with Kulikov, Bruce, is last year I think the Oilers were eliminated from the playoffs because their defense, one of the things their defense core couldn't do was move that puck, get that puck going, and the Oilers were stuck in their zone. It hasn't been as big a problem this year, but if you go with Larson, Kulikov, and Chris Russell in your top six, that's three defensemen who are probably average at best, and that might be charitable with some of them. Let's say below average for a couple of them at moving the puck. That's not maybe the mix I was hoping to see this year on the Oilers defense. And, Dave Tippett loves his defensive veterans.
Yep.
But I'm a little bit worried about that mix. What's your thought on Kulikov?
Yeah, well, 38 games, 0 goals, 2 assists, 2 points.
Yeah.
That doesn't bode well for offense. That said, it's very possible for a defenseman to make a good first pass in his own zone and not garner a whole lot of points.
Correct.
Means he doesn't do a whole lot in the offensive zone, but if he gets the puck moving north, as Holland referenced in his comments, that's obviously a big help. It's been pretty clear to me for the last couple of weeks or more that Tippett's not real super confident in his six starting defensemen, and in particular at the number six spot at three left defense. He's been flitting back and forth between Caleb Jones and William Lagesson,
Yeah.
and whichever guy he uses, he shelters him as much as he can, and the guy will play 12 minutes some nights, and if it's a close, tight game down the stretch, he might play 9 or 8 minutes, and he won't even get the equal of the right defenseman on the third pairing, which these days has been Ethan Bear. And I don't think he's particularly happy having to go with two youngsters on the third pairing, which is how he sees fit to do it. But I think he will, given another veteran defenseman option who's been a top four guy, played 1933 a game in Jersey this year, fourth on the team in minutes, and typically throughout much of his career, he's been between 20 and 22 minutes a night, which is a solid top four guy. That he very likely will slide in beside Adam Larson, is my guess, on the defense first pairing, and then Tippett has the option of Jones, Lagesson, or Chris Russell playing with Ethan Bear on the third pairing.
Yeah.
And my guess is he'll choose, he'll drive people absolutely nuts by choosing Russell more
Over
often than he
Jones.
chooses the other guy. And of course, his other option would be to move Bear back with Nurse and to put Barry with a defenseman, but he again probably wouldn't want to put Barry with a young defenseman. He might put him with Kulikov. That would be his other way of going about how to deploy his defense. But I would suspect that whoever was number six before will on paper be number seven now, and it doesn't really matter much if you're seven or eight. Either way, you're not in the lineup. So I think it'll kind of won't slam the door, but it will gently slide the door shut for opportunities for these young fellows. But at the same time, defense will probably improve.
I would play Chris Russell right now over Caleb Jones. And Caleb Jones has just really struggled on defense. And I don't see that's what we're seeing with our scoring chances project. He just leaks grade A chances again at a much higher rate than any defenseman. It's not even that close anymore. He's a good player. He's got a lot of promise as an NHL player. I like that Ken Holland indicated that. But for this playoff run, it's probably the wise choice. I personally would like to see Adam Larson with Nurse tried that out. They're their two best defensemen, I think, by far, and most solid defensemen. Play them as much, ride those two guys, and put Kulikov with maybe Tyson Barrie. Tyson Barrie really needs to play with a defensive defenseman, and if Kulikov is that guy, that might work. And then go with Bear, who has also struggled this year with Chris Russell, a solid defensive defenseman, and I think that might be their best bet. I mean, I listen. I don't really think it matters who they play in the first round anymore. I think they're going to make the playoffs clearly. What I want to see is them try some different things down the stretch. Play Lagesson and Bouchard. Give these guys some games again to see what you have. It's ridiculous the way they've handled Evan Bouchard. I think that's a fair criticism of this organization this year. And Ken Holland, he doesn't really know what they're going to do. Well, send him to the minors for a month here, and get him some games, get him in some action, because this sitting around isn't doing anyone. Either that or play him every second game down the stretch, because it doesn't really matter. I don't think it matters where you finish in the top four, quite honestly. All those teams could equally beat the Oilers, put it that way, or the Oilers could beat them. So I'm frustrated by that with this team. They need passing. They need more attacking. And Evan Bouchard is a player who could give them that. And I just wish they would go in that direction. I know it's difficult because they have the four right shot defensemen and they don't want to move one over, but I wouldn't give Adam Larson a rest. Rest him up for the playoffs. He's been taking a pounding this year. How about you go to Barrie and Larson and say, hey, down the stretch, you're going to play 2 out of 3 games. We're going to run Evan Bouchard in those other spots, and you guys are just you're going to take it easy. and that's how we're going to get ready for the playoffs. Would that be too radical?
Do you envision Dave Tippett doing that?
No.
Yeah.
But that's what I want to see.
I don't envision him breaking up Nurse and Barry, to be honest, because I
No,
think
neither do I.
he's established that sort of five-man unit. With he likes the way they both move the puck and can contribute to a five-man sort of attacking, cycling unit. So the other guys are going to find their spots further down the lineup is my take. And just by how hard he leans on Adam Larson in the last 5 minutes of a one-goal game, if the Oilers are protecting the lead, that's when you see Nurse and Larson playing together and grinding out the dying minutes and trying to hang on to that lead. And Holland talked about how he thinks the Oilers should make a playoff berth, but how he'll be happy when they've sort of mathematically clinched it. And maybe that'll be the turning point where they do start to open up opportunities for some of these younger fellows. I mean, Evan Bouchard, 6 weeks ago today, was the last time he played a hockey game of any description. And yet Holland said plan A, he has no plans to send him to Bakersfield. Today he said in 2 weeks, if he still hasn't played a game, maybe he'll have to reassess it then. But he didn't sort of say in 2 weeks he hasn't played a game. He's definitely going down. He just said he'll reassess at that time. And that's as far as he was prepared to go.
Yeah. So they're now, Bruce, to me, this is the team that they're taking into the playoffs.
Oh, yeah.
And for the first 30 games of the year, Bruce, I was really optimistic about this team. Consistently optimistic, even when they lost. I haven't felt that way in the last dozen games for an obvious reason. Their offense has pretty much dried up. We track grade A shots, Bruce. I'm going to give you some statistics on grade A shots for the first 30 games and then for the last dozen. So in the first 30 games, Connor McDavid had 2.2 grade A shots per game. In the last dozen, 1.7. So that's down a bit. Leon Draisaitl, 1.6 grade A shots per game in the first 30 games, now 1 a game.
Wow.
Nugent Hopkins has gone from 1.5 grade A shots per game to 0.6. Puljujarvi from 1.5 to 1. Yamamoto from 1.1 to 0.5 per game. Cahoon, 0.8 per game in the first 30 games to 0.3. Jujhar Khaira, 0.7. He hasn't had a grade A shot in the last 12 games. Zach Kassian, from 0.7 to 0.1 grade A shots in the last 12 games. Bruce, every key forward on this team is in a huge slump in terms of finding a way to get dangerous shots on net. Whatever Dave Tippett's, so as you say, about 12 games ago, his plan B when his top two lines didn't work out, the top two lines being RNH, McDavid, and Puljujarvi, Cahoon, Draisaitl, Yamamoto. When they didn't work, his plan B was to go to Draisaitl and McDavid to get things to work. And it has worked in the sense Draisaitl's been on a bit of a hot shooting streak. So what he is shooting at net goes in. But overall, Bruce, this has been a disaster offensively. They've gone from 12.8 scoring chances, grade A scoring chances per game as a team in the first 30 games to 7.8. This is a team which is going to start losing and will not win in the playoffs if Tippett doesn't find some answers within his own roster. And like some people will, you can say, well, they've been winning and they've been winning. Mike Smith's been standing on his head a lot of games and they've got some good puck luck. This isn't sustainable and they're in trouble if Tippett doesn't get more creative. And, maybe that's using more offensive defensemen. Or maybe it's readjusting your lines, and maybe it's calling up some players from the AHL, like that great line of Marody, Benson, and McLeod, calling up one or two of those guys to see if they can help out. But he's tried his plan A. He's tried plan B. Plan A was actually pretty good until it wasn't, and then plan B has been, I think, a disaster. He's got to come up with plan C.
Well, disaster, they're 7-3-2 in those last 12 games, including losing the first and the last of those games, and in between going 7-1-2. So a lot of times it was, score effects a little bit. They got the lead and they were hanging on, but earlier in the year when they had the lead, they were hanging on by being more aggressive in the third period and spending time in the other team's end and maybe adding to the lead or at least killing the clock by grinding it down on the cycle in the offensive zone. And it seems like they've sort of retracted a little bit from that, and it's more hang on Harvey style hockey down the last 10 minutes of a 1 goal lead kind of game. And a couple times they didn't get away with it. I mean, both the two overtime losses in there were games where they had a 2 goal lead in the third period and couldn't hold it. And so, I mean, those sting, and on both occasions they kind of deserved it because they kind of became very passive defending that lead. But they've got, I wouldn't say disaster, but I would say they've been in a lull. And I sincerely hope that this week that they're getting off before this next game, and they go right back into a heavy schedule again. But I just thought they were kind of running on fumes. And this, they've had like 2 long Eastern road trips in a row. They've barely played any home games in that time. And they've won, the last 7 or 8 home games in a row. So they've been doing well here, but they haven't been here. They've been here, well, there and everywhere, and mostly in Montreal and Toronto. And now they have to wait this week. They were supposed to play tonight and Wednesday, having a couple of practice days, and then go to Winnipeg on Saturday. Instead, they're sitting around all week. And then now they have to go to Vancouver on Friday and then to Winnipeg on Saturday. And how bad is that they have, and then 4 and 6 nights after that. So it's the schedule is not their friend. They've been really unlucky that the 2 other teams in the division that both had COVID scares, those scares happened right when they were facing a run of games against the Oilers, and they're going to be kind of swimming uphill. And the schedule maker has done them no friends. Did you read the article Terry Jones wrote? Called the guy out by name, and oh man, did he ever hammer the guy that's been hammering the Oilers with some of these rescheduling decisions. I mean, the one on Saturday that had McDavid upset in particular, I think that's what set him off. But the Oilers have that has been a disaster. I will say that. So anyways, they've got time now to refresh, and hopefully they'll use it to good advantage, and we'll see a little bit more spring in their step for 60 minutes.
Playing the game Saturday night turns out to be indefensible. But Bruce, every team has a tough schedule in the Canadian division. I mean, they're all playing the same amount of games in the same number of months here. So the Oilers, they have it, but they all have tough schedules, is the truth. So, and when I say disaster, I don't mean as a team. Like, some things are going right in the team. Their defensive play has been about the same. They're not giving up a whole lot more chances, just a little bit more. So, and their goaltending has been outstanding. The power play has been really strong when it's gotten a chance, and the penalty killing's been pretty good. League, yeah. So there's some things that are working. So this isn't a team that's a disaster. This team is a disaster when it comes to one thing, and that's generating at even strength scoring chances on the attack. And this is a disaster. When you go from 12.8 grade A chances a game to 7.8, that's a disaster. That's the disaster. They've got to figure out a way to get more chances, scoring chances. And this is with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on your team. So Tippett, I think, has been exceptionally uncreative this year. He has yet to go back to the dynamite line this year. He has yet to try Dominic Cahoon with Connor McDavid. He has
17 minutes they've played together.
He has yet to bring up Marody or Benson and give those guys, like, these are the top 2 of the top attacking players in the AHL, yet to give them a chance. I'm not liking it, and I don't get it. So, but it does give him an opportunity at this point to still tinker and to try different things. And I just hope that he does and doesn't stick to the 2 plans that haven't really worked, that aren't working at this point. Now maybe he'll find a way with these line combinations that he's wedded to at this point to turn the team around. I'm not seeing it, Bruce, because when you see these 2 forward lines, let's forget teaming McDavid and Draisaitl and all the issues around that. But when you see Nugent Hopkins, Puljujarvi, and McDavid, or Cahoon, Yamamoto, and Draisaitl, do you see 2 lines in your view that are clicking?
Not really. Not really. No, I don't see the wingers and the centers really being on the same page all that often.
Yeah, maybe they could try Cassian with Yamamoto and Draisaitl. I don't know. Like, there you go. Exactly. But
Yes.
maybe you could try Tyler Benson. How about that? Or Cooper Marody with Connor
Oh,
McDavid. Like there are things you could do. Marody, like you could try Marody, McDavid, and Puljujärvi. And people will say, well, you're playing Connor McDavid with AHLers. Well, there was all I can remember many Stanley Cup years where players would be promoted from the AHL farm team of the Pittsburgh Penguins onto a top line with either Crosby or Malkin, and they would have a lot of success in the playoffs. You know, there's Connor Sherry, there's Rust. I think there might even be another example of that,
Jake
where
Jake Gunsel, who turned out to be a full-fledged
yeah,
sniper, but he sure came out of nowhere, didn't he?
unheralded players you
Yeah,
haven't heard about before. They were inserted into the lineup out of the AHL, and they
Pascal
helped put that
Dupuis.
team over the hump. And I think I I'd like to see some. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet, honestly, but that's what I would like to see is a little bit of, hey, let's just an acknowledgement, like plan A and B ain't working. Let's try plan C. That doesn't work. Let's try plan D, and keep going through until we get some lines that actually have some chemistry, because you know that you have some talent there. Even in the six players who are currently on those lines, they have talent. It's just not clicking.
Yeah, well, it's the old Dave Tippett formula. Hang around for 55 minutes and see if you can find a way to win it in the end. And it's not really very sort of fulfilling in some ways. I mean, it's nice to get the wins, but uh, I'm trying to remember the last time I was like came out of a game and I felt super satisfied about everything in the game. And it's uh, yeah, other times it's well, we kind of got away with that one and pulled it off in the end, or what have you. But it's a tough league. I mean, you're not going to roll over teams unless you're, Tampa Bay or Colorado, and Edmonton inarguably are not that, not at this time.
Were you hoping that they would get Taylor Hall, Bruce?
I have very mixed emotions on it, and I'm in the middle between the two extremes that seem to dominate the conversation. I suspect there's a whole lot of fans that are in the middle, but they don't get into the conversation because they get kicked from one side or the other or both uh, if if they don't uh, take the line that Taylor Hall or bust, or it's it would have been real interesting to see him. I think it would have given him a jolt. It would have been fun to watch. Uh, it hasn't happened, and who knows who's saying what behind the scenes about the decisions that are getting made. What I will say, David, is I'm sure not surprised that Holland defaulted on trading with a have-not team and making a sort of what I call a no-stress trade. You have-not teams that are selling assets at the deadline for any kind of futures, and you have a have team that are trying to rent players at the deadline. So their objectives entirely overlap. They're not fighting for the same thing. They have two completely different objectives in mind. And Holland's first priority remains veteran defenseman. And I'll go back to his time in Detroit when he picked up Jamie McCown, age 36, at the trade deadline, Dmitry Mironov, age 32, Chris Chelios, age 37, Alf Samuelson, 35, Todd Gill, 34, Yuri Slager, 30, Matthew Schneider, 33, Corey Cross, 35 at the trade deadline, Marek Zidlicki, 38. And then when he came to Edmonton, the first guy that he got last year at his first deadline, Mike Green, 35 years old. So what's he go out to do today? He gets a 30-year-old, 700 game NHL veteran in Dmitry Kulikov, and it is exactly like Plan A, page one of Ken Holland's trade deadline manual.
And he's had a bit of success, hasn't he, Ken
Oh,
Holland?
some of those guys sort of did this, at some point, but Mike Green sure didn't. I mean, the jury's out on Edmonton. And he comes here with a long track record in one sense, but in another sense, a clean slate. And he's got do the job here as opposed to ride the coattails of what he did there. And he still talks about his 25 years in the playoffs a lot, I've noticed. But
Yes, well, it's a while ago that he's been in the playoffs, except for last year, if you count the playing round. I hope that I hope his pro scouts got this right. I mean, I don't have an opinion on Dmitry Kulikov. I haven't seen him play. I don't know. I'm not going to venture whether this is a good trade or a bad trade. It seems like it's okay. Has that feeling that it's okay. But so did the signing of Kyle Turris. And, you know, I hope that the pro scouts got this right and have picked the right player. You know, there was talk that Jamie Alexiak might be available. I don't think he was in the end. I think in the end Dallas bought. They're trying to make a move here. Seems like they traded to improve their team, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, that would have been, I think, quite a significant upgrade because Alexiak at this point in his career, he was a significant player for the Dallas Stars last year in their Stanley Cup playoff run. Very good. And those kind of great big defensemen like that tend to have a little bit of, they can have a little bit of staying power. Their size doesn't go away and their smarts increases. And so that would have been exciting to see him come into Edmonton, but not to be, they didn't want to move him out. And who knows if Edmonton would have got him anyway and what the price would have been.
Your dream, eh, David, would be for the Oilers to get Jamie Alexiak after all these years?
Yeah, after all these years. I did, you know, I years ago, I put forward a famous trade request, which would have seen Sam Gagner, who at that point had negative value because he had lost all his value as a forward and he had a fairly hefty contract. And the Oilers' first pick that turned into Darnell Nurse for a 19-year-old Jamie Alexiak, who at that point was killing it in the AHL.
We watched all those games, Texas Stars against Oklahoma City Barons.
Yeah.
It seemed like we watched those two teams play about 40 games during the lockout.
I was
Couldn't have been
very
more than
impressed
20.
with Alexiak at the time. But I learned a lesson from that, Bruce, because it turned out that wouldn't have been a good trade because Alexiak has taken a long time to develop as a player. He's been an NHL player many of those years, but he's usually played about 15 minutes a game. And the lesson learned was, when you see a player in a handful of games, you know, don't judge him on that. You have to see a player more than that. You have to see a considerable amount of games to get a really good sense of a player's value. And so I try to be so for instance, with Kulikov, I'll wait to assess him as a player. I haven't seen him play. Mm-hmm. You know, we can see how much trust his coach had him in New Jersey, which was quite a bit in defensive situations, but you know, he had him out there on the PK, but New Jersey also had the worst PK in the NHL. So we don't know how responsible Kulikov was for that being so bad in New Jersey. We can take some guesses, but not with the certainty to pronounce on a trade, I don't think, whether it's a good trade or not right now. That's not my bag anymore. I don't do that. So.
Well, he was paired up primarily with PK Subban. He played about 60% of his minutes with Subban, and I don't see who quite is the equivalent player on Edmonton to PK Subban.
Oh, Barry.
That said, when they were, well, I guess they have some things in common. When separated, Kulikov consistently did better than Subban when they were on different pairings. So, and he had heavy defensive minutes. Like his shift starts are like 30% in the offensive zone to 70% in the defensive, and yet he played like 45% of his minutes were against elite opponents. Like they were feeding him the toughs, and he was getting outscored a little bit, but not a lot. And the Devils were actually out shooting, despite starting in their own end against tough opponents. They were actually getting more shots than the other guys. So he must have been doing something right.
Well, possibly, but we don't know who he's out with. Like these are these on ice numbers are well, and three other forwards, an ever-changing cast of forwards. So they weren't
these are numbers. I can tell you that. This is New Jersey we're talking about.
Sure. I'm just gonna wait, Bruce. I'm not gonna.
No, fair enough.
Maybe he's good. Maybe he's bad. We'll
try and read the tea leaves, and then you see the real thing on that. Then you actually drink the tea, and it's maybe a little different than you expected. And that's so. We'll have to wait a couple weeks before we can see him because he won't be eligible or ready to play when the Oilers play 4 and 6 days, and then they get another 4 or 5 day break after that, and then after that he should be ready to go.
Well,
So we'll see that.
Caleb Jones and William Lagesson should be mighty motivated
Huge games
in
for
the
those
next
guys. Yeah,
few games.
huge game.
Yeah, Caleb Jones is. I've seen improvement with the puck
Mhm.
in recent weeks. He's still struggling defensively. He and Barry, they seem to get overwhelmed a little bit too much. Lagesson, we haven't seen in a while. He was really struggling both defensively and moving the puck by the end there. And you know, I think Lagesson was thrown into a tougher spot, though. He's never been really used in the bottom pairing. He's always teamed up with Larson, or generally was. That's your second pairing.
Yep.
And I'd like to see actually just Lagesson in a third pairing, because I think let's see him if he can handle that, because it's a very different role and much easier to survive in those sheltered minutes. I'd like to see him get that chance. That would be my next move if I was the Oilers. I'd like, put Lagesson back in there. He's a bit bigger than Jones. Brings different style of play, and let's see how he does now that he's sat for a while and see if he can improve. All right, Bruce. The last holdout for the Oilers. The only other change that they can make other than calling players up is if Dylan Holloway signs, but that's kind of sounding like it's iffy. He's coming off this broken thumb. They won't know till early May exactly where he's at with that. So that's kind of a long shot at this point to make an impact in the playoffs, but you never know.
Yeah, it's hard to see him come like that. Broken thumb really put pay to the idea that he was going to come out of college, use the momentum of his good season, sign and pop in the lineup and see how he does. And now by the time he's ready, there's going to be a vanishing few number of games left. And the Oilers have to make a decision on whether they want to burn a year off his entry-level contract, because that's how it works with these college guys, that once they're 19 years old, it's different if he signed when he was 18, but of course he was a late birthday, and there was no way to sign him until he was, at the end of his college season. And so he still has the option of going back to Wisconsin next year, and the Oilers may have to use that burnt year as a sweetener. Say, sign now, and we'll get you. Your next contract will come that 1 year earlier. And you sometimes see that with youngsters coming out of college. But I'm not sure that a 19-year-old kid in his draft plus 1 year. I mean, Alexis Lafreniere is not ripping it up in New York now, is he? And he was the first overall draft pick. So, I mean, there's obviously lots of nice arrows with Dylan Holloway, and I don't suppose he'd hurt the team, but I don't know that he'd give him a huge boost either. I mean, he's going to be a heck of a player in 2, 3, 4 years, but this year, I wouldn't count on a lot.
That is a very sober and realistic take to have, Bruce. My only thought about him is they don't necessarily need a lot. Like, they're not asking him to skate down the ice and score a goal. They're asking him to skate down the ice and hit somebody. And in a defined role, well, I agree with your assessment, but in a defined role, he might be able to have some success. Where if all he has to do is forecheck and back check, essentially, that's really what they're looking for him. Now that's simplifying the game too much, because obviously you have to take and make a pass all the time in the NHL, and that's where it's going to take him some time probably to get up to speed. But anyway, I still have I guess I'm always thinking back to the great Oilers teams, and then I think back to that 1990s line of Graves, Murphy, and Jelena. But even those players had considerable AHL pro hockey experience by the time they came together on that line. I believe they'd all played a full season or more,
Yeah, well,
many
Jelena
more.
was the youngest, and he'd been drafted in 1988, 7 overall in 1988,
There
and he
you
was
go.
traded as part of the Gretzky sale. He came to Edmonton, and so he was the youngest guy, and he was 20, I
Yeah.
believe, in 1990, and Murphy was, the other guys were like 22, right in there. So they were kids. They called them the kid line, which. Uh, but they did have AHL, some NHL, certainly pro experience. None of them were like a raw rookie just brought into the NHL that season
Yeah.
or that spring.
Jelena had played 46 NHL games that year and had 17 goals. So he had already shown in the NHL that season that he was chomping at the bit to get more playing time. And finally the coach got creative, Bruce, and he went to plan C or D rather than sticking with just plan A and B. And he put that kid line together, and it made all the difference. This is what I hope for with the Oilers. I really do believe if you get the right chemistry on lines, if Tippett can just figure that out, this team has the talent to go far in the playoffs. But he's got to do better as a coach to get that chemistry right on the lines. That's his fundamental job, to get the right players on the ice at the right time. And I still think he did it last year a number of times. So I hope and expect he's going to do it this year.
Yeah, well, the key on that kid line to me was Adam Graves, and the surprising decision to move him from the wing into the center of the ice and make him the center on the line with Gelinas and Murphy. Like, to me, at the start, they were three wingers. What are they doing together on a line? But Graves' ability to make that transition at that time, and he later did play a lot of wing in his career, but he was able to play center on that line. This is the of the three, he's the guy that's maybe the most comparable to Dylan Holloway, with lots of toughness, and physicality, and versatility,
turned
and
out to be a hell of a
defensive
player.
chops. So
yeah,
if the Oilers get an Adam Graves out of Dylan Holloway, I think we'll all be happy.
Wouldn't that be nice?
As long as he stays in Edmonton and doesn't. Remember, Adam Graves went to New York, where he went on to score 280 goals in his remaining career. And the NHL, as compensation, gave the Oilers Troy Millette, who scored one goal for the Oilers. How's that for equal compensation? 280 to 1.
Wasn't that brutal? That was just so brutal.
Thank you, NHL, again.
Yeah.
Another such a kind decision.
We love the NHL. we have fun thoughts about the NHL all the time. All right, Bruce.
Here was my dream headline from today, David. This is pipe dream headline. Calgary Flames trade Derek Ryan to Edmonton Oilers for the same third-round draft pick they stole on the Milan Lucic decision. Didn't happen.
All right, Bruce, thanks for talking.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.